You already know what time it is. Welcome back in to the NFL with AJL, episode 33. We're live on a Thursday night. I know it's not the usual Tuesday or Friday. Preseason football literally kicking off as we get the show going, and we got it over the weekend as well, so we'll be having a show coming next Tuesday talking about the beginning of the preseason. Hope everyone's had a great Thursday, though. You're locked in on episode 33. Please make sure to like the stream wherever you're at. Subscribe on YouTube, of course, as always. You know, the QR code for every bit of podcast and social media content. Get in the chat with us as well. You know, we love to engage with you on the show. We've got a guest tonight, and we've got a loaded show. The closer the NFL season gets, the more news we got rolling off. Jonathan Taylor and the Colts, are they really beefing? Is it really anything to worry about? We got some training camp injuries, big, little, or no impact. Richard Sherman and Skip Bayless, will it work on FS1? Alvin Kamara finally suspended 3 games from the New Orleans Saints, first 3 games of the season, and we got to pay respect to the 2023 Hall of Fame inductees and an awesome segment to end the show as well. But like I did mention, we do have a guest on the show tonight. No stranger, he's been with us before. Please welcome Bryson Carver from the Carving It Up podcast. What's good, man? Thanks for stopping in on a Thursday night special.
Appreciate you having me on, man. Excited for the NFL to get going. Obviously, preseason kicks off tonight, but so we're a month and a little less than a month away from Lions Chiefs. Like, we're that close. You can taste it. So very, very excited.
Are we 1, 2, 3, 4? We're 4 weeks away from today, starting the NFL season. Hall of Fame game was a week ago. Not talking about that tonight. I know we kind of should have, but it was just good to see football back on the slate and everything. Like we said, we got CJ Stroud taking his first snaps tonight. That won't be on the show this evening, but we'll get into that as other shows roll out. But it's good to have you in, man. Like I said, guys, please make sure to like and subscribe on all platforms. Share the show. Get in the chat. You know, all the goods for episode 33 are coming right at you, and we're not going to hold it any longer. As like I mentioned, Jonathan Taylor and the Indianapolis Colts, are they really beefing? Is it really something to worry about? And for all of you that might be kind of out there wondering what's happening, just a small breakdown of the contract talks and situation between JT and Indianapolis. So about 3 months ago, switched agents to Shaq Leonard's agent, his teammate who is a linebacker, and he said he was going to begin contract talks. Just a month after that, they officially began. Jonathan Taylor said he wants it done before the season, and he emphasizes he wants to retire a Colt. Then we had a little bit of Jonathan Taylor's agent and the Colts owner going back and forth on Twitter. Jim Irsay, the Colts owner, was saying that we negotiated a good CBA, took years of effort and hard work, to now say that a specific player category, a.k.a. a running back, wants another negotiation after the fact. It's inappropriate. Some agents are selling bad faith. Jonathan Taylor's agent comes up and says, bad faith is not paying your top offensive player. Bryson, I'm sure you and I would both agree on that. I know I do. Jonathan Taylor requests a trade. Jim Irsay says, I'm not trading you. I don't care what you say. Then we have the comments from Jim Irsay talking about if he dies and Jonathan Taylor's out of the league, no one's going to miss them. The league goes on. It's a privilege. True foot in the mouth moment. Then reporters say that he might have suffered a back pain working out in Arizona. Jonathan Taylor says he never suffered it. He never reported it. So I don't know who your sources are, but get new ones. Stay with me, guys. We're almost there to the current timeline of this beef with Jonathan Taylor and the Colts. Pat McAfee, former Colts player, Pat McAfee show, of course, going to ESPN, major guy on YouTube, says the relationship between JT and the Colts seems to be improving. And the latest is he's taken time away from the team to now rehab the same ankle injury that he had last year. So after all that being said, Bryson had to fill the people in on what's actually going on with this tiff here. Do you think Jonathan Taylor, this is a little bit of an interesting situation. I don't feel like he's all other running backs out there right now asking for their money. Is he justified for wanting his payday and really having this back and forth with the franchise?
I think any player who wants his payday is justified in doing so. I've talked in depth about this on my show, Carving It Up Live, about how, the value of a running back, especially over the last, really, I call it the Mahomes era, because around the time Mahomes came in the league, you had a lot of these rule changes with how you can or can't hit the quarterback. Some of these new offenses come to the NFL that have deviated more and more away from running the football. There's the stat that I've used that the last 4 Super Bowl champions, the highest that any of them have been ranked in rushing, is Kansas City just this past season at 20th. So running the football, I would argue, has never been less important in the history of the NFL, you could argue, and certainly the position of running back. Even the best running backs in the league, your Henrys, your Jacobs, your Saquon Barkleys, your Tony Pollards. So those guys obviously dealing with contract holdouts as we speak. And like you mentioned, Jonathan Taylor now. Listen, he's been a guy who, with the exception of last season, has stayed healthy for the majority of his very young career thus far. Obviously, remember a couple of years ago, he was He's arguably the best offensive player in all of football. He's up there with Cooper
Definitely.
Kupp.
Yep.
Had a massive season with the Colts. I remember loving him out of Wisconsin in the 2020 draft. But
best running back in the draft, in my opinion, when he came out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and then Wisconsin's been kind of running back for the last decade or so. So he obviously comes out of there. But I think at the end of the day, two things can be true, as I say all the time, that Jonathan Taylor is more than justified in wanting his fair share. And again, the Colts are. I think the Colts are within their right to maybe extend this a long time. Obviously, we'll get into Anthony Richardson, what this means for him.
Right.
But Jim Irsay, I don't know if that we've ever, even more than Jerry Jones, who I've been highly critical of, I don't know if we've ever had a more tone-deaf owner when it comes to negotiations or relationships with the players. Like, that's just something about how, me and Jonathan Taylor could die tomorrow and nobody care. Like, you don't say that during negotiations.
You don't publicize that comment at the very least.
No, you don't. I remember, and I've never been a Carson Wentz guy from the get-go, but I remember when they decided to trade Wentz to Washington, and he had the comment about how, we would have made the playoffs if our quarterback could play better. It's like, you don't say that. You don't just openly diss a player like that. Like, it's just, when you have these meddling owners, you have your Jerry Jones, you have your Jim Irsay's, or formerly, thank God, now your Dan Snyder's, it tends to really get in the way of things. And I think you're seeing that right now with Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, definitely. You got a lot of people out there saying, oh, this could really be the agent and the owner's fault for making the JT situation so crazy. Some people say it's not really as major as, it's coming off from the media, and some of us believe. On the flip side, I do think it is a pretty serious matter. I want to get into that, a couple points down from now. But like you said, two things can be true at the same time. I do definitely believe Jonathan Taylor is justified for wanting his money, because to me, he's not an injury-riddled back. This isn't an Austin Eckler that's mistimed, consistently. This isn't a Dalvin Cook that's mistimed consistently. This isn't a situation, it is a situation to where you see Daniel Jones fall off as a quarterback when Saquon's not behind him. The Colts went 4-13 this year and picked up Anthony Richardson for a reason with the high pick in the draft. You know what I mean? Like, he barely gets handed the reins halfway through his rookie year. They take off. I want to say they go to the playoffs that year. They do, and lose in the wild card. They win 11 games, if I'm not mistaken. And everybody after that year is like, man, wait till JT gets the reins. He does. 1,800 yards, 18 touchdowns, first in the league for both, and he's absolutely taking off. Last season, he gets injured. The first season he gets injured out of his early 3-year and now going into his 4-year career, they literally fall off of a cliff. And, we'll get into this next point too, but to know that they were mismanaged so bad between quarterback, then they had injuries, the way the roster was built, Sam Ellinger, Matt Ryan, like, it was freaking horrible, right? One of the worst, maybe shakiest front offices we've seen for a team that really had high hopes coming in. I know me especially. I was pretty pumped when Matt Ryan went to the Colts. I was like, Matt Ryan needs to go to Minnesota or Indy. He goes to Indy, and then it falls flat completely like that. So Jonathan Taylor is undoubtedly justified for wanting his money. I think this is kind of a special situation in the league rather than other running back situations out there. But of course, we do see the market today as well, and the Colts are wanting to adhere to that. They're not wanting to pay too much, get into maybe a Kamara, a Zeke, possibly a Christian McCaffrey type of situation. But Jonathan Taylor has been the face of that franchise since he was drafted there. He's the main player. He's going to be the main player next year. And people say that things are getting better. But let's get into the next point that I'm sure some people are kind of curious about, more than just Jonathan Taylor wanting his money. Do you think the Colts are mishandling the situation? Jim Irsay's comments saying he's not going to trade them, kind of seeing how even last year there was some major mishandling of the franchise. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I forgot to bring up a point that you were talking about earlier, and I remember talking about this on my show a week or so ago about how there was the whole thing about, there was a report that he had back injuries, and then Jonathan Taylor said, no, I don't have back injuries. And I don't think, call me nuts, I don't think a player is going to lie about his own body, his own injuries.
Right.
And so the question is, I don't know if the media just came up with that out of thin air. Where did they get that? Was this a negotiating tool maybe that the Colts put in somebody's ear and put it out there? I don't know. But it's about as mismanaged as I could think of from a player and front office perspective with the Colts. Again, when you consider that you do have a young quarterback coming in, we'll see if he starts week one. If it is Gardner Minshew, we'll see about that. But listen, it's a young team, young defense, young coach, and you kind of want to have a little bit of stability there. Like that's one of, again, I've been a proponent of, I defend these organizations for not paying running backs. This is one of the few where I would get like, hey, he's more valuable to your Derrick Henry, for example, in Tennessee. Like the value that he has to his offense is not like the average running back to the average offense in the NFL. Like, he's certainly more valuable to Indianapolis than, say, Isaiah Pacheco is to the Kansas City Chiefs. It's a completely different dynamic. So I think the Colts are again, mishandling this about as bad as you possibly could, given the predicament they're in.
Yeah, right there with you as well. And it really just doubles down on that first point of Jonathan Taylor being justified for wanting his money. I mean, being such a focal point of that offense, and everybody remembers him coming out of college. We thought he was going to be RB1 from the start. I can't remember who was in front of him. It might have been Marlon Mack, if I'm not mistaken. And then they give Jonathan Taylor the reins halfway through the rookie year, and he goes off. Sophomore year was great. Third year in the league falls off some, and some people come out and they're like, wow, it's really risky for an athlete coming off their worst year of their career and asking for an extension. And it's like, well, yeah, it's their worst year because they had injuries, but it's undeniable that when he is on the field, when he is in the game plan of Indianapolis, they're rolling. I mean, they literally in his rookie year lost a wild card game. You would have liked to see them make the playoffs the next year, but I can't remember exactly what it was. I know the Colts defense kind of took a hit, and then, the quarterback situation never really stable after, hell, if I'm remembering correctly, Phillip Rivers comes through there at the end. Matt Ryan comes through there. We've had Carson Wentz come through there. It's kind of tough, to think about some of the veterans that have come through Indianapolis. But I hate to see them mishandle this situation because, again, just a few years ago, I mean, they're losing a wild card game, and it feels like they have a bright future. I feel the way about the Colts as I do. I feel better about the Colts than I do the future of Arizona, but Arizona and Indianapolis were two teams where it's like, okay, they've got a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. They're starting to trend in the right direction. They have a season or two that's off. Really, Jim Irsay's kind of managing and just the whole head coaching situation of last year, and they're picking fourth in the draft. And you're kind of wondering what type of team they're going to be. Arizona, Kyler Murray, the team that they have, I think they start 7-0, go 11-5 down the stretch, and now they're in the contention for the first and second overall pick. And it's crazy what a season of mismanagement, quarterback confusion can really do for a franchise in the NFL. Now, this, again, speaking of a team that reminded me before, y'all have heard me say it ever since I've been back with the NFL with AJL. The Broncos last year, when they had that mishap, new coach, new quarterback, new owner, a lot of noise in the offseason. The team was sold. I was like, I don't really see what the Broncos are going to be shaking with. Do they have the talent? Yeah, but a lot of that stuff matters. So feel like kind of the similar situation here walking in with the 2023 Colts. You got all this outside noise with Jonathan Taylor. Anthony Richardson, who's only played 13 college games. I love the training camp news. I love what the media is feeding us, but I don't give a damn about training camp, really. I don't give a damn about pro day. That's where you're supposed to have your mistakes.
I hate
That's
pro
why
days.
it's training camp and practice. I want to see what you're doing in the pads, right? Anthony Richardson being a rookie quarterback. Again, love all the stuff we've heard out of training camp for the Colts, and especially him. New head coach in Shane Steichen, which I'm a fan of. We've seen the toolage he's had with Jalen Hurts, with Justin Herbert. A little bit of a shaky front office and ownership compared to last year. You've got Matt Ryan and then Sam Ehlinger, and then I think there was one more quarterback that got popped in there, and just being so mismanaged along with the Jonathan Taylor injury, winning 4 games is very tough to see. All of that said, does this worry you for a very, very young Colts team heading into 2023? Again, rookie QB, new head coach, a lot of outside noise with the best offensive player.
I mean, it's not a positive. It's not something that you exactly. It's not like a something they can use to propel them to accomplish what they hope to accomplish this year. Look, I've been, and we've talked about it. We were on the same draft show this past draft in April when Anthony Richardson got taken by the Colts. And initially, and I talked all throughout the draft process and during the draft, and we were talking about specifically the completion percentage, 52%. What was the stat you gave about where he was ranked in college football?
Anthony Richardson was 45 he was 45th out of 45 FBS quarterbacks for accurate passes in college football. And he's played 13 games. I'm not knocking him, but I said Anthony Richardson is Trey Lance with an even bigger question mark. Or I guess maybe less of a question mark. I don't know. You got 1 year. Trey Lance played 1 year, took a year off, got drafted with a lot of trades. Anyways.
Yeah, but no, that was because again, we were talking about that in depth during the draft process about the 52%. That's usually, unless you're a freak athlete, which Anthony Richardson is, right. That's not something that just, accuracy is just something that just hits you. It's not, you can work on it, you can get better, but there's only, for some guys, there's only a certain ceiling. Right. We've seen that at times with, I remember back in Cam's career, Cam was never able to get over that consistently to like that 65% that what you need to be now as an efficient player in this league. That's why Joe Burrow's been so successful despite not being a crazy mobile quarterback. And so I think for Anthony Richardson, basically what I've come around to is that, the whole fit with Shane Steichen, listen, was Jalen Hurts as sound a prospect as we've seen come in the NFL when he came out of Oklahoma to Philly?
Right.
Not necessarily. Like Philadelphia used him in some kind of like how Baltimore used Lamar Jackson, some like wildcat packages. But
Yeah.
I thought Hurts could
See,
become
I
the
think
starter.
Philly mishandled Hurts too.
You could argue that. Sure.
Yeah.
And again, the development, it
Love
took
him as a
time.
prospect coming out.
Yeah, well, there you go. But in year 3, he was able to develop into an MVP candidate player. I'm not
Right.
saying Richardson's going to be able to do that, but it's the thing I worry about. Like the coach, as far as the fit, I think is perfect. That's exactly the type of fit he needs.
Yeah.
They got Michael Pittman Jr. They got some nice pieces they can build on as future drafts and trade deadlines and free agencies go on in the future. It's the
Right.
organizational structure I worry about with Jim Irsay and company, which we know
Right.
sabotaged the career of Andrew Luck. Like you have this generational talent at the quarterback position. You just cannot for the life of you put an offensive line in front of him, and it ends his career prematurely. And so I certainly hope that's not a similar situation with Anthony Richardson, but that's what my concern went from accuracy to where I'm like, well, maybe they can get the most out of what he can potentially give you in the future to it's not the greatest organization it could have gone to. Like Seattle would have made more sense in terms of long term. But listen, I'm rooting for the kid. I'm a Tennessee fan, and so I don't root for Florida quarterbacks. But he's a great kid. He's a hard worker, so he's easy to pull for. But we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I've really been picking up on the Anthony Richardson hype as well. I mean, you hear all the leaks from the media, you hear the training camp, you hear the 50, I think 65-yard bombs he's throwing to Alvin Pierce and this, that, and the third. And I'm gonna love Shane Steichen having a major role in molding Anthony Richardson, because knowing what he just did for Jalen Hurts, like Anthony Richardson, just on a raw perspective, one of the best we've ever seen, but definitely you would take that over Jalen. Of course, Jalen has some of the intangibles, a lot more accurate, bigger moments he's been in, obviously just went to a Super Bowl. So he's got a one up there, rightfully so, in that aspect for Anthony Richardson. But it does worry me, getting back to the question, it does worry me. It does concern me for a very young Colts team for 2023, because when you've got outside noise, like we've seen it in the past before with players, with quarterbacks, with certain things in a franchise, like noise doesn't fare well in the NFL. It's kind of okay in the NBA because the NBA is a very, very star-driven league. People have mentioned that multiple times. Might be a little okay with baseball, but when you get into it with the NFL, you just
the less noise, the better.
Right, definitely the less noise.
New England's a great example of that the last 2 decades.
Exactly. The less noise, the better. And when you look at, franchises like New England or potentially even the New Orleans Saints over the years, like the guys that keep quiet, they might not be out there knocking it down every year, but it's a model of consistency. And I feel like that's one thing we have not seen with the Colts. You put this raw of a quarterback in there. I'm here for the coach. I'd like to think that Irsay is going to act and say better, and I really hope so, because Anthony Richardson's going through all this. And at the end of the day, there needs to be some compromise between Jonathan Taylor and the Colts, whether it's more on one side or more on the other, because JT's the focal point of that offense. He's going to be behind your rookie quarterback, and you're going to need that pressure relieved off of Anthony Richardson for it to really be a rookie campaign that you're going to be proud of. And of course, he's probably not going to have really high hopes. We know what he's coming into the season. We know what he's coming into the league with, but very young Colts team for 2023. A lot of new aspects. Reminds me of the Broncos from last year. Said it about the Jets as well. You see some similarities, of course, like Aaron Rodgers. Not really similarities with the Jets, but Aaron Rodgers himself. All the differences walking into New York. Kind of a couple different situations here, but it does worry me some. But you guys get in the chat. Let us know what you think of the Jonathan Taylor, Indianapolis Colts beef contract situation. Is it really as serious? However you guys want to break it down. But now we're going to spill over into some training camp injuries that have unfortunately happened walking into the 2023 year. And we're going to go big, little, or no impact. We got 8 situations here, and we're just going to discuss whether it's going to be a big impact for the team, little impact, or no impact at all. So we'll start probably with the hottest one we've all seen and everyone's been clinging to. I think it happened a couple weeks ago. Joe Burrow goes down with a calf injury. He's quoted to miss several weeks. Big, little, or no impact.
Well, he's arguably the second or third best player in all of football, certainly the second best player in his position. So I think it's a huge deal for Cincinnati. The question is, and I heard Jamar Chase say the other day, like he said, man, I don't want you coming back to week 5. Like don't rush it. Don't put yourself in a position where you could, compromise yourself in the future. Like calf injuries or one of those calves, hamstrings are like, you don't come back until you are 100% ready to go. And so the fact that if this was going to happen, the best time for it to happen is obviously training camp.
Of course.
And so for Cincinnati, the question is whether or not they can tread water. if they can go 2-2 with Trevor Siemian at quarterback, again, we know they have as good of an offensive personnel as there is. Improved
Right.
offensive line, Joe Mixon, great receivers, a very good defense, although they did lose both their safeties, which is a concern. But they're a team
Yeah.
that's good enough to tread water, going 2-2. But listen, the AFC North is, in my view, maybe this is just me being a biased Steelers fan, but it's probably the toughest division in football.
Definitely.
So you don't want to get off to a rough start, which, look, they started 0-2 last year, and they ended up in the conference title game, won the
Right.
AFC North. So again, it's all going to be hinging on what the word several means. Again, it
Right.
happens at the beginning of training camp.
Yep.
I would be stunned if he's available for week 1 against Cleveland, but it's Joe Burrow, so it's a big deal. No question about it.
Yeah, going to double down and say big deal as well. You talk about Trevor Siemian, the guy that's, QB2 on the roster. He would be the one coming in taking snaps. And don't get me wrong, a good enough offensive line for sure. You got Joe Mixon back there. You've got some great offensive talent, but it would be a very simple system that you had probably seen him plug into, maybe a lot like what we saw with the Jimmy Garoppolo or, maybe with Gardner Minshew at times, or even with Brock Purdy, just a very simple cut and dry system. But the coaching, the defense is good enough. The offense is definitely there enough to make it acceptable, like you said, to possibly go 2-2. I didn't look at the schedule, wish I would have, but nonetheless, I know it's going to be a big impact here. Love to see him out there week 1. I have the feeling maybe he could be. We're 4 weeks from today of, being on this live show to where we've got, well, obviously he's not going to be in that game, but on that Sunday, just a few days after, he'll be out there on the field. Now we got Jalen Ramsey, who suffered a training camp injury. He's out until December after he has meniscus surgery, just traded from the LA Rams to the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins got a lot of hype this year coming in, a lot of good defensive players, but Jalen Ramsey out into December, big, little, or no impact.
Believe it or not, I actually think it's kind of a little impact.
Mm.
This is a Dolphins defense that played pretty well at the end of the year. They've got obviously added Bradley Chubb at the trade deadline last year, very good pass rusher. And we forget Xavier Howard's still a very good corner, very productive corner in
Right.
this league.
Just
And he's
coming off a
obviously
rough year, unfortunately.
coming off a rough year. He says he's looking to, really, shut the doubters up, shut the haters up. And,
Right. Bounce
obviously
back.
we consider arguably the biggest outside of, at least in my opinion, Brian Flores getting hired as the DC in Minnesota, fixing what was a horrible defense last year. I think Vic Fangio going to Miami is as big of a coach hiring that isn't a head coach hiring as we've seen in the NFL this past offseason. So I think he'll get that defense to new level. Again, my question about Miami is not, obviously we understand what their offensive talent is. It's the health of Tua, and then when Tua is healthy, is he a quarterback? Because we saw this at the end of the year last year. Is he a quarterback where the more he plays, the more DCs get film on him, the more predictable he becomes, the more limited he ends up getting? But I don't think it's listen, Jalen Ramsey himself is coming off a rough 2022 campaign. Even the end of the 2021 season when the Rams won the Super Bowl wasn't playing his best football. He got cooked numerous times against Cincinnati by the likes of T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. So that became a little bit of an issue, but I don't think it's near as big of a deal as people think. So I'm going to go little.
I'm going to go little impact as well. Like you said, Jalen Ramsey coming off that kind of subpar for his standard season, of course, with the Rams. He does win that Super Bowl, thankfully. And he's been a corner that I feel like is one of the more controversial ones because some are like, yeah, he's a lockdown, no doubt. Some people won't even put him in the top 5 potentially. It just depends on really who you talk to. I know we both recognize talent. We know he's one of the elite players in this league, but he does have a lot to prove. You could possibly venture towards big, though, because X Howard as well as Xavier Howard coming off of that rough season. And you want to see that defensive culture. Thankfully, they hire Vic Fangio in the offseason, who is really going to be a supplemental part to that defense. We know Sean Payton wanted him for his defense. Obviously, he escapes and goes to the Miami Dolphins, kind of on the likes of a Brian Flores as well, who is with the Minnesota Vikings now. I don't know. I think I'm going to correct and go big here because I know he was a big piece coming over. I know it was to really help supplement because X Howard, of course, did have that little bit of a rough season. I think the tandem of the two of them will help out, but missing until December, I think we're going to see a different defense once Jalen Ramsey comes back, and the numbers will reflect that too. Now, a major fantasy player who absolutely took off when Matthew Stafford got there, they win the Super Bowl together. Cooper Kupp is down with a hamstring injury. LA says it's day to day, not giving too much news, I believe, on what's happening. What say you, though, Bryson?
That's a big deal, and I've always been a Cooper Cup fan in large part because a good buddy of mine, John Rivera, Fan Perspective Podcast. Shout out to my guy. He called Cooper Cup my twin. I don't know if there's any resemblance there, but listen, I'll give him love where it's due. But listen, he's
I
been one of
see it a little
those.
bit.
That's what I'm saying. Like he said, I'm like, I sort of see where he's coming from there. But obviously, he had arguably the greatest single season any receivers ever had a couple of years ago with the Rams. And when you consider LA, which with a team that's again, you talk about earlier with the Colts and Cardinals, how much 18 months can change everything. Rams
Oh,
are a perfect
yeah.
example of that. They're hoisting the Lombardi Trophy to now in a weak NFC. You have a lot of folks that don't even think they're going to make the playoffs.
Right.
Despite Stafford coming back and healthier and Cooper Cup and whatnot. So it's not a very deep Rams roster. Aaron Donald obviously flirting with retirement. So obviously, again, trading Jalen Ramsey was a big one. So losing Cooper Cup and they lost. I know it didn't work this past season, but Allen Robinson left to go to my Steelers. Like this is you want to talk about being valuable to an offense? He really is the offense because they don't really have much of a running game. The offensive line did not get better in the offseason. So for Matthew Stafford, a quarterback that's getting up there in age, already dealing with a tough offensive line, you'd at least like to have that number one receiver you can go to and have full trust and support in, but it doesn't look like you're going to have that potentially for the near future. So I think it's a very big deal for the Rams.
Yeah, I think it's a major deal, too. You see how Cooper Kupp really becomes that vital part of that Rams offense as soon as Matthew Stafford comes over, having arguably the best or at least the second best wide receiver season in NFL history. And the Rams are one of those teams. Shout out Pick a Side Podcast. I actually mentioned this in their latest episode. The Rams are a team that feels like they're one player on both sides of the ball away from going through a rebuild. Like Cooper Kupp, if he went out for the season, it would feel horrible. If Aaron Donald, for some reason, got hurt and was out for the season, now that Jalen Ramsey is gone, it would feel horrible. And of course, you enjoyed when, Bobby Wagner was there. Now he goes back to the, what's it called? Now he goes back to the Seahawks. I want to say did they sign Von Miller, the Rams?
No, Von Miller went to Buffalo.
Okay. Where was he? I feel like he went. Did he not go from the Rams and then sign with Buffalo? Did he?
Yeah. He left after the Super Bowl and then signed that 6-year contract with Buffalo last year.
Okay, so okay, so I'm thinking they have another veteran lead from the defense. Matthew Stafford,
Whitworth retired,
come in, right? Whitworth retired, which was huge, legendary offensive lineman, major part for them. So you don't want to see this happen for a team like the Rams. I'm going to say big impact as well, though, because when he's on the field, we know he's one of the most unguardable receivers. And yes, I do think you look a little bit like Cooper Kupp as well. Broncos wide receiver Tim Patrick out for the season. I want to say with a ruptured Achilles, if I'm not mistaken. Might have been an ACL or a meniscus. Can't remember. We know he's out for the season, though. Sean Payton and Russell Wilson will not be able to have him at their disposal. Big, little, or no impact.
I actually think this is a sneaky big deal because Tim Patrick, we forget a couple of years ago, had a very productive season with Teddy Bridgewater quarterback. Obviously, the Broncos didn't have the highest hopes that season, but we have Sean Payton coming in, and the receivers that he's obviously with Drew Brees back in New Orleans was able to really get the best out of. I think. You consider Denver. I know they have Jerry Jeudy, but has he at any stage of his career really gotten to that level we thought he would get to coming out of Alabama, arguably the best receiver in college football at that time? So and you could say, well, what about the quarterback? Well, Garrett Wilson dealt with 4 quarterbacks last year and was undeniably one of the 10 best receivers in the sport. So that's something I worry about. I worry a little bit about their tight end unit now. Listen, I don't think this is going to be a death nail to Denver's playoff hopes, but it's definitely a ding. So I think it's much closer to a bigger deal than it is a little deal.
Yeah. I don't know if I would be willing to lean big deal, but I do know what you mean about the contributions that Tim Patrick has had. And shout out to him the last couple of years. I didn't even know he missed apparently all of 2022.
Yeah, he's dealt with some bad injury luck.
Yeah, I think he came back from, and I figured out this happens sometimes between athletes. It can be on the same leg. They'll come back from the ACL, and I guess because the Achilles might be overcompensating for the healing ACL, boom, they turn around and rupture the Achilles. You've seen it in baseball, basketball, football. Definitely unfortunate. I am going to go little impact because we know that I at least feel like I know they drafted a receiver, if I'm not mistaken. We know that there's Jerry Jeudy as well. I think Jerry Jeudy might really have an actual breakout season, be able to get to that 1,300-yard receiver. We know he's dealt with some injuries too, though. I want to say in his sophomore year, that really didn't help him out. His rookie year and last year were pretty solid. So I'm hoping with Russell Wilson and Sean Payton that he'll be able to break out more. Tim Patrick would be a guy that if he was there, 6, maybe 7, 800 yards, depending on how he's plugged in, maybe even 1,000-yard receiver. Not too much of an impact, though, in my opinion, for me to go big. Now, the Falcons signed Jeff Okudah, former, I think, number 4 overall pick that went to the Lions.
Third.
They pick him
I think it was
up.
the third.
Yeah, 3rd overall pick, excuse me. That was for the Lions. Now he is with the Atlanta Falcons. Had some injury history. He goes down with a leg injury. He could miss up to the first 3 weeks of the season. What do you think?
Well, given that it's only the first 3 weeks of the season, I think it's a little deal. And if it was like he was out for the season like a Tim Patrick or something, I think it'd be a huge deal. Atlanta over the last half decade has had massive struggles defensively. We talk about obviously their talent offensively. The question is, can Desmond Ridder, produce given the guys he's got around him, starting with Drake London? But listen, defensively, they've really struggled over the last few years. They've struggled to put together a consistent secondary. Their pass rush has really been not much to speak of outside of Grady Jarrett. So they've really struggled in that regard. They've tried to address the corner position in recent years in the draft, but they've really never been able to kind of be able to hash that out. So they bring in a guy who was the number 3 overall pick back in 2020, and now he's out to the first 3 weeks of the season. I'll say little, but if it drags out, this could be a big deal for Atlanta given their defensive struggles.
Agreed. Could definitely go towards a big part because they've done so much of that rebuilding in the offseason. And I even said it. I was on record. It's ironically my best video on the YouTube channel is I think the Falcons will have a top 10 defense going into next year when you look at everybody they signed, all the players that they brought in, knowing that they've been trying to turn it around big time on the defensive side of the football. And who knows, maybe they'll be 12th, maybe they'll be 13th or 14th, but they have all the pieces in place with a Jesse Bates, with a Caden Ellis, bringing over a veteran that's going to give you something, of course, in Calais Campbell. They bring in Bud Dupree. I know there's multiple names that I'm missing there as well. But I think they're going to be in some good hands this year. They also bring in Jeff Okudah. We know he's been injury prone since he's come into the league. If he's healthy, yes, he can be that guy that was the 3rd overall pick. But we don't necessarily know yet. So I'm going to stick with little impact. But if he does miss time longer, or if for some reason we can assume he was going to be that type of player, then yes, we could bump that impact up. Now, Zach Moss breaks his arm and will miss the rest of training camp. Going back to the Indianapolis Colts here, I don't know the gentleman's name that's in first on the depth chart, but it's not a name that I believe anybody is going to be remembering as we think about the Colts this year. All respect to him, Zach Moss, and Jonathan Taylor. Big, little, or no impact for Zach Moss and the Colts.
Big deal, just not because it's Zach Moss, because this is sort of, I don't believe in NFL gods necessarily, but there are some times where you have all these Jonathan Taylor news, and all of a sudden the number 1 running back of the depth chart breaks his arm, and it's like, well, this is maybe a sign like, guys, you probably need to get something worked out with Jonathan Taylor. Again, we know there's a disconnect between the front office and his agent, as we talked about earlier in your show. But I think it's a big deal for that reason. Like, if they don't sign Jonathan Taylor, man, they don't have anything to work with in the running game other than Anthony Richardson, if he even starts week 1. So they're in a bad spot in that regard.
Yeah, gonna say big deal as well because of the way the Jonathan Taylor situation is going. You want, even though Zach Moss isn't, super regarded or really respected because he wasn't necessarily handed the reins and just really didn't have, I feel like, that part of an offense to really be able to get plugged into and actually get his reps and get his yardage and his snaps and everything up. So it is going to be important because, with the running back one that's on the depth chart now, it's going to be clearly a fall off from Jonathan Taylor. We saw that when Jonathan Taylor's not that focal point, what can happen with the record, the team, and the offense. Hometown player, Saints guard Trey Turner, who they literally sign moments, it felt like, before this happened, tears his quad, out for the season. Saints have been a team that, I hear some podcasts saying, oh, the Saints O-line is great. It's good. It's what it's always been. It's probably the worst Saints offensive line in a decade, if I'm being honest, based on the draft, how injuries are rolling out, Trevor Penning making me really nervous. I'm not the biggest fans of some other guys that we have out there. Like, I really only trust Ramczyk at the end of the day. Hated to see Teron Armstead leave. I hate that Andrus Peat cannot stay healthy as he was once, a very healthy player for us. Big, little, or no impact for New Orleans.
Because of the reasons you just mentioned, the lack of depth, I think it's a big deal. And you consider the fact that, this is I'm glad you brought up the fact that they've been struggling a little bit in that regard, because obviously losing Teron Armstead to the Dolphins a year ago, I remember was like one of the bigger free agent deals that nobody was really talking about. And obviously he's been huge for Tua there. But I think this is a big deal. Obviously there's the old saying that I've talked about in my show before, that offensive lines are like the air conditioned system. Like, you only notice it when it's not working. And so when you have a Derek Carr, who's a veteran quarterback, and some great, young wide receivers led by a guy I love, Chris Olave.
Yep.
It doesn't. Chris Olave can't get the ball if Derek Carr's on his butt the whole game. So that's obviously an issue, and obviously for the running game, once we'll talk about Alvin Kamara when he gets back, is going to be a big loss for him. So sucks for Trey Turner, sucks for the Saints. I think this is a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal as well because you want to see the Saints have that consistency in their O-line, bringing in Derek Carr, understanding that some of the guys that are behind him on the depth chart, and the Saints always having a solid O-line helped with a good run game, helped with a good play action game, screen game, passing game. Breeze was a big timing quarterback in that system, and we'll see a big difference and much less of that with a Dennis Allen and Derek Carr, but it always is going to come back to your offensive line. And I was excited when we signed Trey Turner. I was like, great. I know he's not going to be a very, elite guy or maybe even a great guy, but it'll be good. He'll be rotational. I feel like I'll be able to trust him, tears the quad, out for the season. Big impact, no doubt. Last one here before we get into the break. All three Seahawks running backs are currently injured. Kenny McIntosh, rookie out of Georgia, Zach Charbonnet, rookie out of UCLA, and also Kenneth Walker, who is turning into a star running back before our eyes. Great rookie campaign. Big, little, or no impact for this final training camp injury.
I think it's big. I'm gonna sound like the biggest alarmist here. Everything's big. But I just think
good ones, though.
It is. No, there's some big injuries starting with Burrow. No, I think it's a big deal for Seattle. Given and people talk about, hey, Geno's coming off this comeback player of the year season. They just added the kid out of Ohio State. I'm forgetting his name at the moment. They just added the wide receiver there.
Jason.
Yeah, Jason Jackson Smith and Jigba, adding him to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, looking to have a big year. Should have, by the way, been in the top 100 players. DK should have been.
But kind of wild.
It was very wild. But listen, Seattle, even back when Russell was in his absolute peak of his powers, they were a run-first team. Obviously, remember back in the day with beast mode, and even now last year, Kenneth Walker, as you mentioned, had an excellent rookie season, has a ton of upside as a prospect and now as a player. So this could be something that plays Seattle. And obviously, listen, the expectations are much greater than they were a year ago. A lot of folks thought that last year they'd be not necessarily in tank mode, but in like a soft tank kind of. Geno's like that transition quarterback for a guy to eventually draft, and they shocked everybody, made the playoffs, and so they're looking to build off of that. Losing those three guys is definitely going to hurt them.
Yeah, it is going to be a major impact there because when you look at how Kenneth Walker was playing out with things, when you look at they bring in Kenny McIntosh, who was a solid running back from Georgia. When you look at Zach Charbonnet, who was up there in those running back rankings as well, to be able to make an impact coming out of college, going to Seattle, who is a team that really is trying to turn into that pass first team, but they were for a while, and a reason why Russell Wilson left because they were a run first team. And you look at the running back room, that's what made me really think Seattle was going. That Seattle was a winner of the draft. Also, their top pick, and Devon Witherspoon is out with an injury as well. I think he's going to be okay to get back in the first of the season. Apparently, Pete Carroll says it's a different hamstring injury, if I'm not mistaken. But back to the Seahawks running backs, yes, I do think that's going to be a big impact because of, again, how we've seen Kenneth Walker perform in just the rookie year, and he's even getting top 10 rankings from places like PFF, other power rankings out there. Kenny McIntosh and Charbonnet coming out of UCLA. It's going to be big, and you don't want those three pieces, really the whole running back room, before they start to have to go, cherry pick from free agents, practice squads, whatever the case may be. So definitely a big impact there for the Seattle Seahawks. Ladies and gentlemen, this is episode 33. Been back on the show for about 6 months now of the NFL with AJL. I'm here with the Carving It Up podcast, Bryson Carver. He's been with me on the show before. We broke down Jonathan Taylor's beef with the Colts. We have talked about the training camp injuries. Please make sure to like the show wherever you're at, share on all platforms, subscribe on YouTube. The QR code on Bryson's side of the screen will give you every bit of podcast and social media content that the show has to offer to you. And always make sure to check out the guest on all social media platforms as well, at Carving It Up Podcast on Instagram. I believe you're on TikTok, correct?
Yep. Yes,
YouTube,
sir.
of course. You already know all the platforms out there. Check out his show on all podcast platforms too. He's with the Grid Network. I was with them, with those guys on the draft show back in April. Surprisingly survived, I think, all 3.5, 4 hours.
Like 4.5, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think 4.5, plenty of water, plenty of conversations, plenty of wow moments that happened there. Guys, thank you for tuning in to episode 33. And as always, please never forget to check out Buy and Sell with AJL for all your worldwide professional real estate needs, whether you're looking to buy a home, sell a home, or invest in real estate. Drop your email in the comments or at them on social media to get on their exclusive newsletter, or to even take advantage of the AI that they've implemented into their system. And also, I'm sure you guys heard the intro music was different tonight. Shout out to my boy John Singleton. Went to high school together over here in Georgia. Sandy Creek High School alumni class of 2016. That was his song there, Wins Over Losses. Check him out, John the Baptist, on all music platforms. I think the album is Welcome to the Kingdom, if I'm not mistaken. That's the interlude that we had for the intro music tonight, Wins Over Losses by John the Baptist. I'll make sure to link his stuff down low in the comments as well. And we've got a revival of a show, man. And I don't really know how I feel about it. I think this was really the last guy I saw coming in, considering their history. I'm better at life than you.
Yeah.
In recent memory, or maybe one that we'll never forget. So it's going to be Skip and Sherman, Undisputed, it looks like. Richard Sherman is joining Skip Bayless on Undisputed. It comes back August 28th, and this comes after Skip basically begged Charles Barkley, stupidly, in my opinion, to go over and be his co-host. Charles Barkley was firing back on his multiple platforms as well. Skip Bayless leaked on his show the fact that Lil Wayne every Friday will join Skip Bayless for a segment. But considering Richard Sherman and Skip Bayless's past, really just the sophomore year altercation on First Take with him and Stephen A. Smith, do you think this is a good fit for the show and really a good buy-in, I guess, for FS1?
It's an odd fit. There's no question about that. Obviously, you mentioned the whole "I'm better at life than you." That was. I remember when the initial reports were coming out saying, "Hey, Richard Sherman made you want to dispute." I'm like, there is no way after what happened.
I was like, is this scripted? I was like, no,
Yeah.
I really think that was him. But you look back like sophomore year, I think he was second in the league in interceptions.
Yeah.
And I think Skip was like, "Do you think you're already as good or better than Darrelle Revis?" And I think he didn't take the bait and also wanted to be an ass, and he was just like, "I'm better at life than you." It was the stare for me. I was like, Sherman, you're a savage, but you got it.
It was definitely awkward. But I read a report saying that he's going to be on for 50 to 100 shows per year. So I don't know if that's saying, okay, he's only going to be on during football, because obviously, to be on a debate show like that, you got to talk all sports: football, basketball, maybe a sprinkle a little baseball, boxing. So college sports. So does he bring in an NBA analyst? I know I read that Rachel Nichols has signed a deal probably to be the show's moderator.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting signing for them. So maybe does she join him as a debate partner for NBA stuff? I don't know, that you have that aspect to it as well. But listen, I've been I remember where I was when I watched the first episode of Undisputed. So I've watched the show quite a bit over the last 7 years. I think I've been vocal about this, that when Skip headed to FS1 and decided to make Shannon Sharp his debate partner, and to his credit, fought for Shannon. Skip was the known commodity. People know who Skip was. People know he didn't like LeBron James, loved the Dallas Cowboys, the whole bit. But as time passed, Shannon kind of became the star of that show. Shannon's turned into a star in his own right. Again, we'll see, where he goes, potentially ESPN, potentially somewhere else. If he teams up with Stephen A., this could be like Celtics Lakers in the 80s, for crying out loud. This Undisputed First Take back and forth. But listen, if I guess the word I would use to describe it is uncertain. I think Richard Sherman is the type of dude that would work well in a debate show. But what about with Skip, who has a tendency, we know in the past, to throw some personal attacks in with his sports arguments? So that's
he's gotten worse the longer he's been allowed to be on Twitter and on the air. Honestly.
Yeah, it's gotten bad. I think probably the first example I can think of that is I remember the whole Dak Prescott thing when he was attacking him, being vocal about his mental health, and so ever since that, it's been kind of.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah, I know. It was
Hamlin tweets jabbing at Skip, or jabbing at Shannon. That's the two that everybody's hanging on to.
Yeah, the Tom Brady debate from last December. Yeah, so it was it got rocky. So listen, it was bound to come to an end at some point. But I'll be watching, no question, just to see how it fits. But it's an odd fit. That's what I'll say.
Definitely an odd fit, uncertain for sure. And like I said, the longer that Skip is on camera, the longer that Skip is, on Twitter during games, and somehow the damn Cowboys always managed to be a topic on FS1. And that was the point to where it kind of started to lose me for Undisputed, because like you said, it's not a kind of for me. That was Shannon's show. It was Skip and Shannon Undisputed. You know what I mean? Absolutely great show. We saw them break ground, I think, in 2016. They'd go to the Super Bowl every year with FS1. Like, I admire FS1 as a company because I think Cowherd's a great show.
Cowherd.
I like how they've redone Speak and added Joy Taylor. It's not just Speak for Yourself now. That show did an entire rebrand.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, Acho really starts to get his front and center, a guy that I have a lot of respect for, very eloquent, like I'm about to get into with Richard Sherman. So then you
And I
see
love
this.
first thing. I think first things first. I think they did a great job over there
You
with
go.
Nick, Chris, and Kevin. Like I think they have great chemistry as well.
Yep, fantastic. And it broke my heart to not only know that when the show is going to end, they were like, once the finals is done, the next damn day in the morning, like what is it? 6 a.m. their time because it's 9
Yep.
our time. If
Yep.
I'm thinking that correctly,
6:30.
You got Shannon Sharp crying on camera saying that like he's done, he's out, he gave it all he had, and I'm not downing him for that. But then to just watch the YouTube channel stop, and to just watch the podcast stop, and the clips and the Instagrams and the TikToks just stop, and it's like, that one really hit because we saw an emergence of Shannon Sharp, who, in my opinion, might be the greatest broadcaster right now. I'm just going to say what it is.
He's hot.
He's
Club
very hot
rolling.
commodity right now. I believe him and Pat McAfee, and you look at guys like, Matt Barnes with All the Smoke podcast and the Pivot podcast, and Shannon's got Club Shay Shay. Like, that's the future. And Shannon is grabbing that and cultivating it and leaning into it. But let me get out of the nostalgia here. This is about Skip and Sherman Undisputed now. So here's what I look at. Sherman's comments, obviously, in his sophomore year on, First Take with with Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless. We talked about the I'm better than you at life. You'll never be this, never be that. But we have seen Sherman clean it up. Now he's retired out of the league. Definitely got humbled in his last Super Bowl. Was it with the Niners? Yeah.
It was with the Niners when they lost to Kansas City.
Yep.
Yeah. He was guarding Tyreek, I think, which that's not easy. That's not for the faint of heart.
Right. I saw someone, they were like, would you rather guard Cooper Kupp or Aaron Donald for one play? I was like, Cooper Kupp all day. AD would just steamroll me, and it would be different for everybody, right? But Tyreek, he would run away from you, right? Like, give me a chance, And then you have Skip's edginess, the interrupting, the eye rolling, the insensitivity with DeMar Hamlin, the Tom Brady debate back in December, like you said, just jabbing at people personally. And, I'd like to think that that's not Skip, but a good friend of mine sent something to me recently, and they were saying, XYZ person doesn't like to service people. They just want to set them up, and it reflects in their morals. I personally think that's kind of what we're seeing with Skip now, because Skip in his early to mid 70s, all the respect for him. He's been doing it for a long ass time. Successfully went from ESPN to FS1. So he's just kind of
getting career risk.
Right. And he's just kind of getting a little edgy as he's moving on. Then you've got Richard Sherman's eloquence on his podcast, very factual, very respectful, versus the Richard Sherman edginess on the field. I think some of us forget that Richard Sherman is one of the best trash talkers of all time.
Oh, heck yeah.
And he didn't even, he did play for a while, don't get me wrong, but his prime felt very short. Like after the Legion of Boom, like Richard Sherman was out. We're like, oh, he's with the 49ers. Then they're in a Super Bowl with, out of all people, Kyle Shanahan and Jimmy Garoppolo, right? So we had to continue to give him his respect as he was in the league. So having said all of that, that just feels like a blatant no to me. Definitely risky, uncertain, kind of odd. I'd like to think that Undisputed will be what it once was, but we know that nobody's going to be able to mimic Shannon Sharp, let alone the relationship that Skip and Shannon had together. It was great. They started out with Joy Taylor. They moved on to Jenny Taft, who I personally thought was the best host on the show. Then they moved on to Jen Hale. So they're keeping it up. Knowing that they're bringing Rachel Nichols in, that is some enlightening news. I'm like, okay. Like if she's, pretty solid at moderating, which all the respect to her. She's
very established.
Her own show, very established with, the NBA Network and all. But y'all get in the comments. Let us know what you think about Skip and Sherman. So weird to say.
I know it sounds very weird. And something else too. I think Sherman's done a great job with Thursday Night Football on Amazon. I think he's really found his lane there as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, they return August 28th. They've already announced it on social. Apparently, Lil Wayne has redone the entire intro, and Skip Bayless says it blows the original Undisputed song out of the water, and apparently to him the original Undisputed song was like the best song in history, which I won't lie, it was good.
Listen, Wayne's awesome. He's no joke.
Yes, got a lot of respect for Lil Tunechi, as they like to call him. But let's get into another situation. Speaking of my New Orleans Saints, we saw it happen in Las Vegas at the Pro Bowl. Kamara is able to actually dodge it, play the entire last season, but now the suspension has come down as Alvin Kamara is suspended for the first 3 games. Lord have mercy, let me get my words. Of 2023 after the Las Vegas incident. And we've been waiting for a long time for this to come down. and it's only 3 games. We'll get into the topic of, if that's enough, kind of what we feel about that. But they've got the Titans at home, the Panthers and the Packers on the road to open those first 3 games of the year. I predicted 12-5 overall just due to the fact of the cupcake schedule. Of course, I think my Saints are that good. But when you look at who they're playing, outside of Trevor Lawrence, they don't really have a reputable quarterback unless Bryce Young or CJ Stroud really pops off early, or pops off at any point in the season to be competitive enough considering what they've got around them. So it kind of doesn't make me nervous in that aspect. So does this 3-week suspension, you think, impact the win-loss for the New Orleans Saints, man?
I don't think it's a massive impact. Again, you look at their opening schedule; they got a home game against Tennessee, a road game at Carolina, and a road game at Green Bay.
Yeah.
I say they probably go 2-1 in that stretch. I actually think they lose the opener to Tennessee and then win the next 2.
Yeah.
And so I think for New Orleans, listen, I don't think 12-5 is crazy given the talent of the team. I don't think it's as talented as say 3-4 years ago, like where they were one of the best teams in the NFC.
I wouldn't
but
say here's a diehard and tell you that.
yeah, absolutely. And listen, I've been as big of a Derek Carr defender as there is. I think I've said this. I think he's the 10th best quarterback in the NFL. What he had to deal with in Las Vegas.
Oh,
that's what I'm saying. He's that dude. He's that dude. But what he had to deal with in Vegas and / Oakland for that decade, on the field, off the field, the ownership, coaching, carousel, and players getting in troubles, it was kind of a disaster there. So to go to a stable organization, the Benson family, and obviously an excellent front office in general, and a very good roster. Dennis Allen concerns me. That's the only thing that has me holds me back from really believing this team. And that's he's a tremendous defensive coordinator. That's shown over the past couple of years when he was with Sean Payton before he got the job.
New Orleans in that aspect.
Yeah, he was excellent, and I just think for that's why we're at 12-5. But I'm with you. I'm looking at the schedule, and listen, aside from, I think Trevor's the only elite, or at least proven elite quarterback that they play. I like Goff. We'll see what we get from Justin Fields. There's a game against Kirk Cousins on the schedule, but yeah, it's Matthew Stafford, but that's late season, or the Rams even in contention by that point. So and again, listen, I think the NFC South is, at least in my view, without a shadow of a doubt, the weakest division in football. I mean, I saw a discussion on TV today. Could Baker lead the Tampa Bay Bucks to the playoffs? It's it's that bad. It's that bad. We're talking about Baker lead the Bucks. They were 8-9 with Tom Brady. I know he's a lesser version of Tom Brady, but that's still Tom. So I have today, it's between them and Carolina, because I think Carolina got it right at the head coach spot. We just see what we get from Bryce Young. But yeah, let's go back to Alvin Kamara. I do think it does make an impact. He's fallen off a cliff to a certain degree, given the contract he signed a few years back. He hasn't been quite the same player. But listen, he's still a very productive back. Did the Kareem Hunt deal go through? Because I know he left Indianapolis without a deal.
Let me look. And that was crazy too. Indy offered him more money just so he wouldn't step on the field and actually practice for us. I'm going to take a look into that. I was hoping that we signed him. No updates. Leaves Colts without deal despite reportedly getting offers. Second team he visited but didn't join. Yeah, he left the Colts without a deal.
So is he coming? The New Orleans thing is kind of off the table, or is there potential maybe they come back to the table? Like,
yeah, from what I'm seeing, they offered him a contract. He turned it down. They even tried to swoop in and steal him. Guess they didn't offer him enough. I'm hoping the Saints can make a play for him. I really do. I got respect for Kareem Hunt. Little 600-700 yards. I'm here for that.
Absolutely. No, he's a very productive player, but listen, losing Alvin Kamara it's something. He's talking about big losses before that. It's something. But again, I think like you said, their schedule is a breeze. Again, I think Tennessee beats them, then they win the next 2 games after that, and we can get them back with a 2-1 record and then see where they go from there.
Right, absolutely. And I want to go back and give a little bit of respect to the quarterbacks who are actually going to play, because we got Titans, so that's going to be Tannehill, Levis, Malik Willis. We're going to have Bryce Young, Jordan Love, Baker Mayfield, Mac Jones, CJ Stroud. So it kind of softens up. Then you get a little bit back into it. Trevor Lawrence, Anthony Richardson, more than likely at that point, Justin Fields, Kirk Cousins. So maybe kind of coming back around some. Then you get back into the Desmond Ritters, Jared Goff's, Bryce Young, Daniel Jones, Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield, and Desmond Ritter. So maybe 4 to 5 games on there, if I recall them correctly, that they're actually going to play a quarterback that could give them a run for their money. But I'm right there with you. Sure. I think it makes them drop the home opener against Tennessee, and really just due to Tennessee's defense, me giving more respect to Mike Vrabel than I ever have before. And I never
he's a great coach,
except for the fact when I thought that they weren't going to win but maybe 2 or 3 games this year. Definitely had to get that correction once D-Hop came over. And also with them signing DeAndre Hopkins, us not having maybe our best or second best offensive weapon behind Chris Olave. Don't want to talk about Michael Thomas because I don't care. It's going to be interesting.
That's been a whole situation for a while now.
Yeah, I didn't want to allocate money back to him, but it is what it is. Yeah, 10 games in 3 years. That's just how I feel about Michael Thomas. Glad I got the Kamara jersey and not the Michael Thomas jersey when I was in New Orleans for the first game. Anywho, I do think it makes us drop the home opener, so I will have the Saints going 11-6, falling down from 10-5. But from my record predictions, that still is good enough for them to go in and win the division and make the playoffs. Now, when you look at suspensions that have lined up in the NFL, just a few suspensions for the 2023 season. We've had obviously gambling suspensions anywhere from 6 games to indefinitely for the entire season. 4 games for PED policy. You even go and look, taking PEDs, 2 games. Beating someone up like Alvin Kamara did, whether it was extensive or not, which the video does not look great.
No.
Went back and watched it today, 3 games. Betting on a different sport in the wrong location, 6 games, or in the case of Calvin Ridley, suspended indefinitely or at least for the entire 2023 season. And we know that the NFL, and they were referring to Jameson Williams in terms of betting on 6 games in the wrong place. We know the NFL has never been the greatest with disciplining players. And honestly, it kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit because I love the league so much and they don't have that discipline really in place for their guys. Do you think the suspension was lengthy enough considering Alvin Kamara's actions? And that comes from a diehard Saints fan.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the commissioner. I think Goodell is. I've religiously said I think Adam Silver's the best. What's that? What's that?
They just extended him too, but I will say he probably is. I like Adam Silver a little better, but he's better than Rob Manfred for the MLB.
Unquestionably, yes, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I'd take it. I think I'd take almost anybody over Manfred. But listen, I think Goodell's done a good job. Listen, I've always said the commissioner's job is to make the game better and grow the game, which I think Goodell's done a great job of doing. You've seen with the international series, which is just we've had discussions. Hey, could there be an NFL team in London? Which I think could be a little bit of a stretch, but hey, the fact that we're having that discussion shows you how much the NFL's grown under Goodell's tenure. I don't think 3 games is enough given the gravity of the situation. And again, as far as not to go too deep in the situation, but I think with Alvin, obviously, I was a huge Kamara fan. He's played at Tennessee and he was very productive for us there. Yeah. The thing with him and with anybody is, when you're in a situation where you're at a nightclub, at a bar or something, and somebody's, maybe giving you hell a little bit, giving you problems, like you just gotta walk away. Like don't you are gambling way more, so to speak, than they are in terms of getting in an altercation. So that's got to be something that's on the front of athletes' minds and any public figures' minds, moving forward for sure. But I think that the thing is the most impactful in terms of suspensions is the gambling suspension, because we know obviously with legalized gambling coming in a few years back and these leagues now getting more and more involved with that. Like, right. Listen, we can have the discussion about whether players should be allowed to not. I'm always in the mindset, like, don't put yourself in the position where I can discipline you. And that's the thing. When you consider Calvin Ridley, who obviously got suspended all of last year, like, I forgot what the exact money total is, but he gambled. I think he was going to win maybe, I could be butchering this number, but like $100,000-ish. You're gambling, for that, as opposed to what you're going to make this upcoming season, which is far beyond that. It's tenfold, 20-fold of that. Right. So, I think at the end of the day, it's not something that's worth risking, and I think it's definitely. I saw one player, I think for the Broncos, he gambled as somebody else using somebody else's identity. I think he's going to prison for it. So that's dummy. Yeah, you can't, like I said, you can't put yourself in that position. Dummy. And, it could, given how much things have changed lately with gambling, this should be a warning for players. Like, don't put yourself in this situation. Don't give the NFL the opportunity to suspend you. But, in terms of the bit larger discussion regarding, domestic violence, obviously, which has become a big discussion in the last decade or so, I think it's one that's a very important one to have. But the gambling one's really was stuck out for me. Like, if you're a fan, you want to go on, I don't know, Bet MGM or something, or FanDuel. Like, there's a different set of stakes for you than it is for a player for the New Orleans Saints or the Denver Broncos. So right. Definitely it's something that players got to, look out for.
Right, absolutely. And if there's one thing that my lovely mother always tells me, it's don't draw undue attention to yourself. And I feel like that's something that Alvin Kamara possibly could have done, because like you said, when you're talking about, one, if you're gambling on games, but two, having the gamble of just entertaining an outside heckler. And we've seen Russell Westbrook do it in the NBA. And when you see Alvin Kamara react like this to guys that are, continuing to heckle him, it of course spills over. He gets a few of his licks in, and his boys really really just don't make it look well on camera at all. And don't get me wrong, Kamara didn't either, but you have to be aware the fact that, yeah, it was maybe only $100,000 for his medical bills, but AK, you make a lot of money. I want to say you are the highest paid running back or second highest paid running back in the
He's
NFL
up
right
there.
now. After the Saints signed him to that contract and, considering how he's kind of fallen off in terms of production, and I do think that is more of a byproduct of New Orleans more than it is Alvin Kamara, you still hate to see it for a player. As a fan of the Saints and as a major fan of the NFL, been watching for literally 18, 19 years now, excuse me. I don't think it was lengthy enough. And I've always had issues with how the NFL reprimands their players. They're very inconsistent in regards to the level of offenses and just how they really hand things out. Regretfully, I feel like 6 games at least felt like the standard considering how bad the video looks.
Yeah.
Just what happened overall. I mean, we see Ezekiel Elliott, I think back in 2017, 2016,
2017, yeah.
for the, domestic violence cases. We talk about the earlier suspensions in 2023. Alvin Kamara got less games for physically harming somebody than basically Calvin Ridley, Jameson Williams, and some of these other players have got for, yes, gambling on the sport that they play in, which they know that they shouldn't do, but they view, I guess, gambling dollars more of a risk to the league than their players being on video physically harming somebody. And from an outsider looking in, that's kind of what I think. But I know the NFL is also a very interesting business at the end of the day. But this is why some people can't support the league. This is why some people do have the thoughts like me that they do about the NFL. Hope Kamara learned a lesson, though. Hope the Saints are still able to do well enough in this season. I'd love to still see 12-5 in us, win the 3 that we don't have him with. I definitely think we will go 2-1 as we get him back for week 4 against the Buccaneers from that suspension. And now going into the final segment of tonight's show, again, episode 33 of the NFL with AJL, at the NFL with AJL, at Carving It Up podcast on all social media and podcast platforms. The 2023 NFL Hall of Fame class was officially inducted. We had 129 nominees, 28 semifinalists, 15 finalists, and 9 inductions for the year. Rondé Barber, Don Coryell, Chuck Howley, Joe Klecko, not sure, Darrelle Revis, Ken Riley, Joe Thomas, Zach Thomas, and DeMarcus Ware were enshrined in Canton. And of the 15 finalists, we had a Devin Hester, we had a Torrey Holt, we had I think it was Reggie Wayne that was also in there.
Yep.
Was there anyone from the finalists that really was a snub to you and should have made it further into Canton?
Somebody you didn't mention, Jared Allen, should have gotten in on the first ballot, in my opinion. 12th all-time in sacks. I think he had 7 straight years with double-digit sacks, was just a pass-rushing monster.
Yeah.
Which, listen, you could argue, the NFL could argue, well, from a precedent standpoint, DeMarcus Ware ranks even higher than the all-time leader for sacks, and it took him 2 tries to get in. So I guess from a consistency standpoint, you could respect that. But no, I saw when, I remember they always announced, the week of the Super Bowl, when I didn't see Jared Allen's name. I'm not like a Vikings fan or anything, but I saw that, I was like, what? How did he miss it? But listen, I'd be shocked if he doesn't get it next year. Torrey Holt was one you mentioned. Devin Hester is probably, he's up there with prime time, is probably the greatest returner we've ever seen. I would be shocked if he doesn't get in. So I think Jared Allen was the one that stuck out to me, like, wow, I can't believe he didn't get in the first ballot.
Yeah, you take a look at Jared Allen too, defensive rookie of the year, I believe, or no, did he come in 5th there? Not sure. 2005, second year, 11 sacks, 06, 7.5 sacks. From 07 to 2013, he never had less than 11.5 sacks.
And he had a 22 sack season.
Yeah, he did. 2011, 22 sacks, led the league. 2007, 15.5 sacks, led the league, and had 19 tackles for loss, also led the league there. 14.5 sacks in back-to-back seasons from 08 and 09. So from 07 to 09, 15.5, 14.5, 14.5, drops down to 11 in 2010, doubles it in 2011 at 22. Absolutely undeniable. And, it feels like you kind of forget about Jared Allen at points. Like he was, I feel like he was one of the first few that really got the media coverage of how much he actually barked and talked to people on the field. And I don't feel like he was ever really rude, right? He knew how to talk smack. He was out there, right? So I have a lot of respect for him as a player, no doubt. There were 3 guys that I looked at. I feel like really 2 major ones, but I couldn't include these 2 without mentioning the third. First one, Devin Hester, of course, like you said. Some people might say, oh, well, he only returned kicks, but he's the all-time kick return leader. And he's the best return man in the game next to Deion Sanders. It's better than Deion. I want to say Deion actually gave him those reins and said that Devin Hester is better than me. He's got the records. He's got the speed. He's got the tape. He's got the numbers. He's got our respect. So I really would have liked to see him in Canton. Who knows, though? Because we know it's hard for it's kind of hard for all players to get in, but when you see of how people continuously get snubbed over and over and over again, it really makes you wonder. The next one I'm going to go here is Torrey Holt. And when you look at how Torrey Holt actually hasn't made it into the Hall of Fame, it's pretty interesting because you look at guys like Marvin Harrison. You look at guys like Randy Moss. Of course, you look at guys like, I'm trying to find it here to make sure I have it. Oh, yes, Terrell Owens. All of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. And when you look at, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Marvin Harrison, and then you have Torrey Holt. When you look at their numbers in the span of the seasons that they played and where they actually sit on the records list, you would think that Torrey Holt would get in there. But unfortunately, he doesn't. And he doesn't have 100 touchdowns. That could be what's killing him. Randy Moss had 131. Torrey Holt has 74, so just about half, right? Terrell Owens had 118 touchdowns. He's in the Hall of Fame. Marvin Harrison had 107 touchdowns. He's in the Hall of Fame. But when you look at yards per game, when you look at total yards, when you look at yards per reception, he's right there in line. But just to know that the touchdowns could possibly be holding him out, we know what Torrey Holt did. And to mention a monster, Andre Johnson, of course. Andre Johnson, one of the most respectable players in the game, kind of a Randy Moss, DK Metcalf, up in your face, very physical, will run you over, run past you type of player, leads the Texans with like all franchise career, receptions, yards, touchdowns, whatever the case is. Andre Johnson's name is in that book next to wide receiver records. So Devin Hester, Andre Johnson, and Torrey Holt were the three that I really would have liked to see go in. But for the final segment of the show,
real quick, before we get in the final segment, I know I'm the guest, but I'd like to ask you a question regarding the Hall of Fame because it's an interesting. What is the fine line between, in terms of guys going the Hall of Fame, between guys who, like Frank Gore is a prime example. Frank Gore, I think, isn't he third all time in rushing? But nobody's going to say Frank Gore's the third best running back ever. Do you think, what's the fine line between longevity? Because you mentioned Torrey Holt, like in his prime, was just as good as any receiver in football. What's the fine line between guys who, had the long career, accumulated the stats? There's a lot of guys in the Baseball Hall of Fame, like, how'd they get in? Well, they played a long time and they were able to accumulate the stats, as opposed to, like, again, we'll get in the final segment, not to spoil anything, but Mahomes has played in the NFL as a starter for 5 years. I think he's a no doubt Hall of Famer, given what he's accomplished.
Unquestionably.
What's the fine line? Because that's what I struggle with some of these voters. T.O., there was a lot of other stuff going into that with him taking 3 tries. But like Shannon Sharp, at his peak, Shannon Sharp was a monster, and it took him 3 tries to get in. DeMarcus Ware,
and he's a 3-time Super Bowl champion.
3-time Super Bowl champion.
As a tight end.
Exactly. So it's I don't know. It's an interesting discussion to have. Like, what do you think is the fine line? In that.
I definitely think accolades play a part. Accolades, some people are going to, like, Sony Michel just retired after 5 years. He's got two Super Bowl rings. Nobody's going to vote him into the Hall of Fame. So that's where you have to draw a line there. I think accolades in the amount of time, Mahomes, for example, 5-6 years in the league. He's on a very short list of multiple Super Bowl MVPs, multiple Super Bowl rings. First to do it since Kurt Warner in 2000 for the Super Bowl and the MVP collectively in the same year. So when you get into things like that, I think that's a fine line. When you're breaking records, or if there was undoubtedly a point in your career where you were a peak top 3 to 5, probably got to be top 5 at the worst to make it in. I feel like we've seen guys like, I can't think of names, but guys that might have been floating around that 6 to 7 to 9 or 10 position. We know they were monsters, but they haven't been in the Hall of Fame. They haven't got any votes, things of that nature. I definitely think longevity, your peak, and your accolades, especially with the amount of time that you were in the league for your accolades, just, kind of a rough answer there. I think that really does help because we've heard it's hard for receivers to make it in. I mean, there were 129 nominees this year. 9 made it. Out of those 129, only 28 were semifinalists, and you go look at all 129, you're like, dang, I could probably pick out maybe 70, 80 of those guys I had a lot of respect. And then you get to the semifinalists, you probably know all the names. And as it goes down, you're like, dang, he didn't make it. He didn't make the cut. Oh, it's kind of rough, but I like to see it every year. I always have respect for everyone that goes in.
Absolutely.
It's not easy to make it in this league. It's not easy to win a Super Bowl, and it's definitely not easy to make it into the Hall of Fame as well. But for the final segment, like we were mentioning, we're going to be building an all Hall of Fame team from today's NFL players and we cannot use the same players. We kept it to 9 positions: quarterback, wide receiver, running back, tight end, O-line. Of course, we know there's multiples of those last 4 there. And then for the defensive side of the ball, we've got defensive lineman, linebacker, cornerback, and safety. I think I nailed everyone there. Like I said, we can't use the same players, but we do get to each pick our own position. So I'll start with you, Bryson, as the guest. All Hall of Fame team from today's players. Who is your quarterback? And I'm sure I know, but
I mean, it's not even like what why are we doing this part of the segment? It's Patrick Mahomes. It's again, he's had the greatest 5-year stretch of any quarterback in the history of the game. 2 MVPs, 2 Super Bowls, 2 Super Bowl MVPs. Again, I remember vividly last season, or going into last season. I didn't make the Chiefs like win the Super Bowl or anything, but I remember folks were talking about, oh man, Mahomes had a rough year. I'm like, yeah, 37 touchdowns, 11 picks, and an AFC title game appearance. I'll tell you, he was struggling last season. He was, put him in the Mac Jones discussion. I mean, Patrick Mahomes was just, man, he was just sucking. Like, and it just shows you the standard we have for him. So Mahomes would absolutely be my guy to first guy to go in the Hall of Fame among current players.
Of course. And I'd have to counter there. Totally agree. Can't use the same player, though. I'm going to go Aaron Rodgers. I think we all know he's a Hall of Fame player. Mahomes and Rodgers are compared a lot. What throw can't they make? Let's be real. What defense can't they read at this point? And we've seen both of them have their struggles, but Mahomes and Rodgers are no doubters. Wide receiver, all Hall of Fame team.
I'm going to go Devontae Adams. When you consider what the success he had with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, again, I remember he stepped in his rookie year and he was like the 3rd guy behind Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb. He stepped in as time went on, really developed as one of the better receivers in the sport. And then he joins Vegas and he's just, I shouldn't say just as productive, but putting up very similar numbers with an unstable organization, Carr in and out of the lineup, especially toward the end of the season. His route running skills are as good as any player we've ever seen. His catch radius, his speed, he's got the whole package that you could possibly want in a wide receiver. For me, he's my first guy going in among current players that would be, in the discussion to be in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. And I'm sure some people would maybe want to plug in a Mike Evans here.
Okay.
Possibly a Julio Jones, who knows? And Julio probably should be here. I feel pretty disrespectful for not putting him here, but it might be difficult for Julio because he doesn't even have 70 touchdowns. His last 3-4 years have kind of been marred in the NFL in terms of the limelight of what our standards are for him. I'm going to go Justin Jefferson. I think you talk about the first 3 years in the NFL as a wide receiver, absolutely undeniable. Rookie, Jamar Chase actually broke the rookie record for yards, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, you look at Justin Jefferson, you could possibly throw Jamar Chase in here as well. Definitely Julio Jones would like to get some of that respect. But if I'm being comfortable, I'll go Justin Jefferson. I feel so horrible. I feel like I should have put Julio in. And I know I'm going to get roasted in the comments, but that's okay. On to
You're
running
a Saints
back.
fan.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always animosity between you and the Falcons, right?
Yeah, I got respect for Julio, though.
He's incredible. Yeah, in his peak, he was awesome.
Right. He's done a number on us, and we've done a number on him. So it's all fair and love and war there. Running back, all Hall of Fame team.
This was a tough one. I decided between 2 guys. I decided to go with Derrick Henry for the simple fact that he was the absolute key piece to a Titans team that shocked everybody in getting to the AFC title game about 3 years ago. Again, I thought about putting McCaffrey. Again, Jonathan Taylor is a little too young for me to put in that discussion yet about guys I'd put in today. But listen, he's to have accumulated as many hits as he has, to be the focal point of a Titans offense that is as run first as there is in the league, and is still just as productive. I have to go Derrick Henry.
Yeah. I'd be right there with you as well. I would turn around and go Christian McCaffrey, especially because of the way that he had his Niners career revitalized. Of course, we hope he can stay healthy. We see the Panthers ship him out, and he did a lot for them. It was nice seeing him getting plugged into the offense, accounting for the touchdowns, accounting for the receptions, rushing attempts, receiving, receptions, receiving yards as well. I will go with Christian McCaffrey here. I know he's had a lot of injury-riddled times as well. It was kind of hard picking through some people, though, outside of Derrick Henry. I mean, yes, you've got, Nick Chubb, and maybe you'd like to go Alvin Kamara, but Henry has been doing it for a while at an elite level, and especially with the 2,000-yard, I want to say over 20 touchdown season. You cannot deny that out of King Henry. Tight end, all Hall of Fame team.
I'll let you have the other one. Because I have Devontae Adams, I'm going to go George Kittle. because I
Okay.
need a tight end who's not quite the receiving threat that Travis Kelce is.
Yeah.
It's remarkable with Kelce. He always somehow finds a way to get open, despite being double teamed. It's incredible. But Kittle is one of the better blockers at the tight end position that we've seen among guys who are elite pass catchers. He's obviously been a focal point to that Niners offense for a while. Again, Kittle's the better pass catcher. He's the better quote unquote receiver, so to speak. But
Right.
Kittle's the better all around package tight end. So I go George Kittle.
I would counter with Travis Kelce, of course, or maybe if some people wanted to venture a little further, you could even look into Kyle Pitts. You want to see how Kyle Pitts
Mark
finishes
Andrews
his
as well,
career.
too.
Mark Andrews, of course, too. There was a lot of guys that I felt like we could have plugged into here, and there were some good ones that I knew were going to come forward in the segment, no doubt. Travis Kelce, though, definitely is one I'd love to counter with. He's on that trajectory to go down as maybe the best tight end of all time, and it's no surprise that he's also a Kansas City Chief. Big respect to Kittle, big respect to Mark Andrews, big respect to Kyle Pitts as well. One offensive lineman. There's a lot of great ones out there that you can pick, and I wanted to give the respect of not doing an all-22 build for the sake of the podcast, our minds, and the fact that it is a really, really hard feat to get into the Hall of Fame. Offensive lineman, all Hall of Fame team.
I was going back and forth between two guys. I decided to go with Trent Williams. Given what he's done
Very
over the course
respectable.
of the last decade, I remember seeing a stat, and I actually did a segment last week on my show, my top 10 players of the league, and I had Trent Williams in there.
Yeah.
There's a stat last year where I think it was like he played 870 something snaps, and he gave up 1 sack and 1 other pressure. Like he's
undeniable.
He's as stable as any player at any position in the NFL. He's been consistent going back to his time with Washington, now with San Francisco. I think he's already today a first ballot Hall of Fame, no question about it. He's like the modern day Orlando Pace to a certain degree. He's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely a monster. Spanning from 2010 all the way up until now. Trent Williams, absolute beast. And I loved how he was able to shuffle around with some teams too and really be able to get his fill, find his nice home there with the Niners, correct? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, exactly. Niners. Yep.
Did he come from Washington?
God, it seemed like I remember him coming from Washington. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I want to say he did come from Washington, no doubt. Yeah, great pick there with Trent Williams. I could even go Jason Kelce. I could even go Lane Johnson. I'll go Quentin Nelson, though. As much as I should give it to Jason Kelce, and I'll give it to Jason Kelce, too. Maybe it'll be a little duo here. But yes, Quentin Nelson, Jason Kelce, we've seen both of them be absolute monsters in the league, especially Jason Kelce being a center, providing that protection, knowing how he's been with that Eagles team that won the Super Bowl back then and just went up in the shootout against Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. I will rightfully give it to Jason Kelce, but I would have Quentin Johnson right there behind him. I love your Trent Williams pick as well. Get in the comments, guys. Let us know what you think for the offensive side of the ball as we flip over to the defense. Defensive lineman, all Hall of Fame team.
Well, if we're talking about the best defensive player currently, I'd say my man TJ Watt. But if we're talking all-time accomplishments, it's Aaron Donald. He is, I've called him on my show the 3rd best defensive player of all time behind LT and Deion Sanders. And he's that great. I think he's that. Again, he almost as a freaking interior defensive lineman almost broke Strahan's sack record. He's a monster. He's one of the few defensive players, because we literally saw him do this, to single-handedly take over a Super Bowl. Rams looked like they were in trouble. They were down double digits to the Bengals. Looked like the momentum flipped. And from that point on, he just went a one-man wrecking show. He's got, I think, 3 defensive players of the player of the years. It was only last season. 4. Again, 4?
He could have had 4, but voter fatigue, I think. Is it voter fatigue when they keep voting the same?
No, he voter fatigue is when they go different, yeah.
Yeah, he could have had 4, but they went a different way. I think they gave it to TJ, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, but he's one of the most productive productive is too short. He's one of the greatest defensive players the game has ever seen. I think he's the greatest defensive tackle the game's ever seen. So I would go Aaron Donald.
Yeah, Aaron Donald, I would definitely agree with you. He technically just retired, but I'm still going to throw J.J. Watt in there because he just retired after this season. He's going to be with CBS. We saw J.J. Watt have a little bit of,
nice.
Yeah, we saw him. He's had a busy offseason for the first season of being retired. We saw a little bit of shake and bake with Arizona. We clearly know what he was with the Texans, up there with Aaron Donald in terms of defensive players of the year, sacks. But for him being an edge rusher and Aaron Donald being an interior defensive lineman, you just cannot deny what both of those guys have done. Linebacker for the all Hall of Fame team from today's current players.
Again, if we're going best player, I think it's Fred Warner. If we're talking about longevity, I'm actually going to go a guy that didn't get enough recognition until the greatest quarterback ever joined his team, Levante David. Levante David's been as steady as any player at his position in the NFL for a long time now. He's still, I would still argue, he's an elite player. Obviously, we know they have Devin White now in Tampa, but he's one of the smartest players in the league. He's one of the most instinctual players in the league. I would go Levante David.
Levante David is a very respectable pick. I'm surprised you didn't go Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner going back with the Seattle Seahawks. Of course, you've got a Fred Warner as well. I'd even like to venture and say Micah Parsons. It's been very early for Parsons early on, but we've seen how he can play in the linebacker position, especially on the defensive line as an edge rusher. Absolutely disgusting, and I just keep imagining what Dallas is actually going to have to fork out for him. So I would go Bobby Wagner, back it up with Micah Parsons if I had to. Who is your cornerback for your all Hall of Fame team?
This was between two guys for me. I decided again. I'm thinking about a career accomplishment, so I decided to go Patrick Peterson. I know Pat Pete had a little bit of a rough year. Yeah, he had a rough year last year, but he's one of the better ball hawk corners in the NFL for a long time in Arizona. He's had a rough last few years since, but I think he's been a very consistent player for a very long time. You could argue he's the best defensive player on that Cardinals team that got to the NFC Championship game back in the day. So I would go Patrick Peterson.
Love the Patrick Peterson pick. I won't lie, I didn't even think about him, but you bringing him up immediately puts him right back into the realm, and he really never fell out of it for me. I love that he's a Pittsburgh Steeler now. I'd go Stephon Gilmore, reigning defensive player of the year. We saw how he was very, very tight. With the New England Patriots, we see him go to did he go to the
He went to the Colts last year.
Cowboys, right?
Yep, Colts last year, Cowboys this year.
Yep, there we go. And we've seen in each of his stops, PFF's even graded him, and he's been at least an 82%, if not better, on his pass coverage grade, which has been very good, seeing those stats from PFF, and him even getting possibly, later, or not possibly, but him getting later into his career. You'd like to see that. Another one we could back it up with is very early, and I shouldn't say it, but yes, after Sauce's rookie season, man, my goodness, maybe the best rookie season we've seen from a player, outside of a guy like Justin Herbert, just in recent memory. And for the last position, before we get out of here, for the all NFL Hall of Fame team from today's current NFL players, and we cannot use the same players, the safety position on the defense.
One of my favorite players in the league ever at this position, aside from Troy Polamalu, is Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger. The Honey Badger is no joke. Obviously, your guy at the Saints played at LSU back in the day. He's
turned it around, thankfully, after the start of last year. I was a little disappointed in him. I was like, "Did he tackle? Did he know how to tackle people? Like, what the hell is going on? This is not the Honey Badger I saw earlier on in the career."
No, and listen, he's one of the most, again, to be a safety, you have to, again, where I use with Levante David, I can use with Tyrann Mathieu, is you have to be one of the more instinctual players at your position, and he's as good as we've ever seen in the history of that position in that regard, so I would go Tyrann Mathieu.
Yeah, Tyrann Mathieu, got a lot of respect for it. He was one of mine. I was also looking at either, Derwin James or possibly even Minkah Fitzpatrick. Like Harrison Smith as well, because he plays that very specific kind of safety position. He gives you that Cam Chancellor kind of, I think it was Dante Robinson, the original Asante Samuel, those guys that could just hit hard, play that aggressive coverage, be in and out if they needed to. I'd love to see Derwin James or either Minkah Fitzpatrick both be able to take those reins and go on to the NFL Hall of Fame. So there you have it. We broke down our all NFL Hall of Fame team from today's current players. Y'all get in the chat. Let us know what you think about that. It's going to be a great segment to put on YouTube and all the social media platforms. That was episode not 23, Lord, episode 33 of the NFL with AJL here with the Carving It Up podcast. I'm going to hit this outro music, man, and we'll be out of here.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you having me on, man. Got to do it again.
That was episode 33 of the NFL with AJL. I appreciate everybody tuning in on a Thursday night edition as I'm about to scurry off of here and go see every snap that CJ Stroud has had with the Houston Texans as they play currently, I think, against the Patriots. Y'all make sure to like the stream wherever you're at. Please share the show, subscribe on YouTube. As always, the QR code in the corner of the screen, every bit of social media and podcast content at the NFL with AJL on all social media platforms. Bryson, I always appreciate you hopping into the show. Tell us what you got coming up next, and of course, plug yourself as always.
Listen, we got Carving Up coming back next Monday, 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays, although we might be switching from Thursday to Wednesday, so a little bit of a change in the schedule. But, man, we talk about all things the world sports, NFL, NBA, obviously NFL coming up very soon. Very excited about that. College football, everything going on in the world sports. Check out Carving It Up Live, 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific time. I'm like you. I love going live, love, interacting with people in the comments, so definitely be able to tune in and definitely check out every everybody at the Gwin Network. We got a new show called the 8 o'clock spot on Tuesdays. Check that out as well. And yeah, we definitely building something very special over there. So appreciate you having me on, and definitely gonna have to make it happen once again in the future.
Yes, 100%. 4 weeks away today from the start of the NFL season. Chiefs Lions, 8:20 Eastern time. Yes, I know where it's at. Yes, I know where I'm going to be. Yes, I know we're going to be talking about it on the Friday show afterwards. We will be talking about CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Bryce Youngs, and if Will Levis gets some first snaps on Tuesday's show of next week. This has been the NFL with AJL, Carving It Up podcast, episode 33 of the show.